Chapter 30. Behind him, other kids began to scream in terror, but Jonah could only stare. It wasn't dark behind the cave door. Darkness would be something. Darkness would mean that, with a little light, there'd be plenty to see. Darkness would be comforting, actually. This was so much worse. There was just enough light filtering out from the cave to show that there were no trees anymore, no houses, no path, no rocks, no clouds, no sky, nothing. It was like being deep in outer space, so far away from everything else that he couldn't even see any stars. "We're in a black hole," someone screamed behind him. Automatically, instinctively, Jonah hit the keypad again. 21ST. He hoped it was like the garage door opener at home, where the same code worked for opening and closing, and mercifully, the door began to roll shut again. "It's not a black hole," another kid was explaining, sounding perfectly rational. "It's a black hole, in a black hole, the gravity would crush us." "It reminds me of the Bible," a girl said thoughtfully. "Genesis. The earth was without form and void." Jonah grabbed the not a black hole boy and the girl who thought of the Bible and pulled them through the crowd. He wanted people to be by his side, who could think when everyone else was screaming. He walked back to the adults who were all sitting on the floor now with their backs against the wall, Chip and Catherine pointing the taser and the elucidator at him. Gary and Mr. Hodge looked amused. JB and Angela looked distressed. "Explain," Jonah demanded. "Where are we?" "The more appropriate question," Mr. Hodge said teasingly, "would be, when are we?" JB kicked at him, with both legs at once, since JB's legs were tied together. "Don't be cruel," JB said. "This is bound to be very traumatic for all of them." He looked over at the screaming, hysterical mass of kids clustered by the door, then back at Jonah. "We call this a time hollow. When they shut the door, Hodge and Gary pulled the whole cave outside of time." "So what, like, we don't exist right now?" The not a black hole kid asked. Jonah glanced at him more closely now. He had curly blonde hair, kind of like Chip's. His name tag said Alex. "No," JB said, "we exist, but now doesn't exist." "Why not?" the girl said. Her name tag said Emily. JB glanced toward the hysterical crowd once more. "Get them calmed down," he said, "and make them sit on the benches again. Hodge and Gary and I will explain everything." "We will?" Gary growled. "I will," JB said, "and it's fine with me if they hear only my version." "We'll explain too," Hodge muttered. It took forever to get all the kids back to the benches, to get them to be quiet. Jonah thought he and Alex and Emily had accomplished it when one kid happened to glance at his cell phone. "It still says 10:18, he screamed. "It said 10:18 since we got here." "Shh, shh," Emily soothed him. "Sometimes cell phones break." She sat beside him holding his hand, and that seemed to calm him down. Catherine, Chip, and a few other kids had worked to pull the adults to the front of the room. They stood like dangerous prisoners on trial, Catherine and Chip guarding them from the side. "Just show them the presentation," Hodge was suggesting. "You mean your commercial?" JB sneered. "No way." "You can give the counterpoint afterward," Gary said. "We promise." "Let them," Angela said. "You showed it to me." JB frowned, then shrugged. "All right," he said. "Go into demo mode on the elucidator, sugar," Hodge told Catherine. "See the demo button at the top?" Catherine glared, offended by the sugar, but she seemed to be following his orders. "Let me guess," she said. "The one that says adoption promo?" "You got it," Hodge said. "Now, aim at the wall." Instantly on the front wall of the cave, a movie screen appeared. No, Jonah went over and touched it. It was still solid rock. The light shone from the elucidator, but it was clearly the source of both the screen and the images that suddenly glowed from the screen, shifting photographs of hundreds of faces, seeming to represent every era and culture in history. Despite the rock surface, the faces were clear and unruffled. This was beyond high definition. It was like watching reality. "From the time humankind achieved time travel," a voice boomed out, just like in a movie preview, "people have been stirred with compassion for the sufferings of the past." What followed was a montage of images that Jonah could barely stand to watch. People lost their heads to guillotines, soldiers on horseback running swords through infants. Bodies fell into pits dug to bury the living with the dead. It went on and on and on, agonizingly. Jonah felt like he'd seen all the worst moments of human history by the time the killings finally ended. I'm not allowed to watch rated R movies," a kid from behind Jonah screamed. "Make it stop." "Shh, it's over now," a girl's voice comforted. "It's in the past." Jonah looked back. It was Emily again. On the screen now, all the death and destruction was replaced by a grim-faced man sitting in what appeared to be a TV studio. A caption at the bottom of the screen identified him as Curtis Rathbone, CEO, Interchronological Rescue. The past was a very brutal place, he intoned solemnly, but as much as modern human hearts, but as much as modern humanity's hearts went out to their ancestors, their antecedents, they knew that the paradox and the ripple would make intervention very difficult. Pause it for a moment, will you? JB called out. I think you need a few definitions. Catherine squinted at the elucidator. Where is? Oh, wait, I got it. Curtis Rathbone, CEO, froze on the screen. The paradox, JB called out. That's the possibility that time travelers might cause some event in the past that would lead to their own non-existence, such as, for instance, accidentally killing their own parents. And the ripple is what we call any significant change caused by time travelers, which then alters the present and the future. Think of a stone thrown into a pond and the way the ripples spread out to the edge of the water. Is that clear? Does everyone understand? Jonah expected the other kids to begin shouting, Time travel? What are you talking about? Are you nuts? Or the ripple, the paradox? Yeah, right. Try the psych ward. But when he looked around, the faces around him were as solemn as Curtis Rathbone's. The other kids had seen the nothingness outside their cave. They were ready for explanations, however far-fetched. Okay, back to propaganda, JB said. On the screen, Curtis Rathbone began talking again. We here at Interchronological Rescue were determined to take action, he said. We studied time very carefully. Centuries worth of wars and genocide, famines and pestilence, all the very worst of human suffering. And we discovered hundreds of whose deaths were so horrendous, so chaotic, so terrible, we knew we had to save them, and we knew we could. Someone gasped behind Jonah. That's right, Curtis Rathbone said, almost as if he'd heard the gasp. Rescue is possible. Oh, we knew we couldn't save everyone, much as we would have liked to. Say, save every victim of the 20th century European Holocaust. We knew that was off limits. The ripple would have been extreme. Too much happened as a result of the Holocaust. But to save even the small, insignificant victims of the past, those orphans of history, as it were, didn't our own humanity demand that we try? A single tear glistened in Curtis Rathbone's eye. He dabbed at it and smiled fleetingly out from the screen. We began 10 years ago rescuing children of the Spanish Inquisition, he said, babies left in houses that were then burned to the ground. Children left for dead who were easily revived by our modern techniques. We could save them without causing a ripple or a paradox because they had as good as vanished from history, even without our intervention. And thus, we could transform those dark days of humanity into a triumph of the human spirit, of modern humanitarianism. And now he beamed out at the crowd, the terrors of history receding into the past. The response of the modern age had been overwhelming, Rathbone continued. Everyone was eager to adopt a desperate child from the past, to reach out across the centuries to save poor soul who had never had a chance. Within 5 years, we were running 10 rescue missions a week in every century since the beginning of time. Our generous age paid for plastic surgery for Neanderthals, counseling for war refugees, reconstructive surgery for landmine victims, and then we perfected our age reversal technique so the children we rescued didn't even have to remember their ordeals. We could deliver perfect, happy, healthy, bouncing babies to our clients. That's enough, JB snarled. Turn it off. Catherine must have managed to hit the right buttons because Curtis Rathbone disappeared from sight. Maybe it was Jonah's imagination, but the lights in the room seemed a bit brighter as well. Perhaps Curtis Rathbone had humanitarian intentions in the beginning, JP growled. Perhaps. He did, Hodge shouted. He does. JB ignored him. But what the Interchronological Rescue became was something entirely different, he said bitterly. Purveyors of prestigious names from history for wealthy idiots who want to brag at their cocktail parties. Oh, yes, my little Henry comes from a line of British kings. Didn't you try to kidnap Amelia Earhart out of the skies over the Pacific? Didn't you lure Ambrose Bierce to the Mexican border? The age reversal doesn't work on adults, Gary muttered. You know that. Now, JB countered. Hold on, Jonah said, because no one was speaking up. Age reversal? JB flashed him an angry glance. He turned his glare back to Hodge. Traumatized children from traumatic times in history have a lot of issues, JB said sarcastically. There were problems interchronological rescues never wanted to talk about, never wanted the prospective adoptive parents to know about. Erase the memories and you erase the problems, Hodge said cheerily. What's wrong with that? Jonah stared at Hodge, trying to understand. This is one of the few parts of the theory I was right about, Angela spoke up apologetically. They had turned you all into babies again, even though some of you had been much older, teenagers even. Angela's words seemed to echo in the stone room. Turned you all into babies again. Watching JB's outrage, Jonah had almost forgotten that any of this time travel talk had anything to do with him. Us? He whispered. You're talking about us? JB was glaring at Hodge. Intrachronological rescue got sloppy, he accused. They began taking children whose disappearances were noticed. They caused ripple upon ripple upon ripple. He closed his eyes, pained beyond words. Oh, and your interventions worked so well, Hodge accused. We could repair the ripples. We could have put a few children back if we had to. But no, you and your friends insisted on attacking right in the middle of the time stream. The time crash was not my fault, JB screamed. If you had just surrendered, you're the one who chose to speed away, to slam into the time frame, to ruin her life, he pointed at Angela, to nearly destroy 13 years of mine. No, to nearly destroy all of time. Even tied up, they were about to come to blows again. Jonah had had it. He'd had it with the suspense, the implications, the accusations, the strain. He stood up. That wasn't enough. We climbed up on top of a bench and yelled, "Who are we?" JB and Hodge both fell silent. Then JB said, "Show them." They're going to have to find out eventually. It's F6 on the elucidator, Hodge said. Jonah watched his sister hit a button. The screen reappeared, displaying a chart. It was a seating chart, Jonah realized, like for a classroom or an airplane. He stepped down from the bench to get a closer look and squinted at the names. Seat 1A, Virginia Dare. 1B, Edward V. of England. 1C, Richard of Shrewsbury. His eyes skimmed down the list looking for boys' names or names that sounded familiar. 9B, John Hudson. 10C, Henry Fountain. 11A, Anastasia Romanoff. 12B, Alexis Romanoff. 12C, Charles Lindbergh III. That's who you are, JB said quietly. You are the missing children of history.